much detail as you'd like. Okay, Dr. Dolan, when and where were you born?
When and where was I born? I was born in Jersey City, July 20th, 1923.
Okay, tell me something about your parents and your siblings, if you have any.
Yes, my father was an Irish immigrant, arrived here at the age of 2. He was the youngest of 10. Um, he had to go out to work at the age of 12 because his father and 2 older brothers had died, and he had older sisters. In those days, the men, no matter how young, supported the women. So he had to quit school in the 5th grade. Uh, Later made his own career after working at every kind of a job you could think of. He became an insurance agent with Metropolitan Life. Then later on developed his own insurance business, working for various insurance companies and real estate. And in the around the time of World War I, he was elected to the state assembly, which was quite a thing for a guy that short out of immigrant status. My mother was born in Jersey City. Her parents had arrived here not long before she was born. My father called her the educated one. She went to the 8th grade, and the last 2 years of grammar school in those days were kind of a commercial course. So she went from, again, her father died around the time she finished grammar school, and she went to work very promptly as a secretary in New York, and she was quite a piano player and singer, had really a magnificent voice, and she was the organist for later on in other words, she was born in '88. Pop was born in '76, and in the they were married in 1910. So in the years just before 1910, she had become the organist for St. Mary's Church downtown. My father was a baritone soloist at St. Bridget's Church downtown, and he heard about this good-looking gal who was an organist at St. Mary's, and he didn't like the organist at St. Bridget's. So he went down and tried out for the choir, and the rest is history. I'm the 7th of 10. 5 of us still living. The oldest was a doctor. He was also an obstetrician gynecologist. My eldest sister was a school teacher and then executive secretary. She was executive secretary of the National Foundation, Polio Foundation, before she married in 1950. The next in line was Father Charles Dolan, who was vice president at St. Peter's Prep. Then my sister Mary, who was a school teacher and had 6 children. Then next in line was Father Jim, who just retired as Father Minister here at the college after, I guess it was something like 20 years or so, the longest tour anyone has ever served in the administrative position at the college. My brother John was just ahead of me in the college. He graduated in March of 1943 and served in the Army as a Japanese cryptologist. He was in on the breaking of the second Japanese code. We had broken the Jap code before Pearl Harbor. He was in on the second breaking of it. Then there's me. I have my next in line was my sister Eileen, who was a sister of charity, was previously the director of the Department of Music at St. Elizabeth's College. She had a doctorate in music. Then my brother Frank is a graduate of the college. I think his class was 51, and Frank is a CPA. He's retired now, and living at the shore. I think 2 of his boys got their degrees here from the college. And then the number 10 was a younger brother who died of pneumonia in 1933. So that's the clan.
Sounds like a wonderful family.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, I want to ask about all of them, but for sake of time, tell me more about your father's running the state assembly. Any highlights from that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, but he didn't stay there long. He went in on the a ticket with Frank Hague. I think that was the original Democratic ticket that beat the old, my father would kill me if I don't remember the dates on it. I think it was Whitpen was a Republican, and the Hague group put together people like my father to try to beat it. So he served in the assembly, I think, 2 terms. But he said he quit. He wouldn't run again because he saw too many of these people taking money onto the table. And when they saw that he had noticed, they said, "Hey, Charlie, everybody does it." And he said, "You know, I'm going to quit before I think that everybody does it." So he then devoted himself totally to his business after that. But he still maintained his contacts with the various branches of politics. As a matter of fact, at my, if you know your Jersey City history, in the late 40s, there was a big split between Frank Hague and John V. Kenney, and they wouldn't talk to one another. They wouldn't even be in the same building. But when my mother died in 1951, right after I came back from Korea, I heard some whispering who was standing around. Frank Hague had come in and was still in the house, and they said, "Look, hey, Johnny Kenney's coming, Johnny Kenney's coming." And they said, "That's the only time those 2 have been in the same building since the breakup," and which was kind of a tribute to my father and my mother. And but no, he never got involved in politics after that. As a matter of fact, when I came home from Korea, there had been a big piece in the Jersey Journal with a picture of me taken in combat. And Bernard Berry was the mayor of the city at the time and a friend of my father's. And he had said to my father, "Charlie, if there's any job he wants in the city, tell him just name it." And I was going on for my graduate training in OBGYN, and I said, "Pop, I don't need that kind of job." He said, "I'd be ashamed of you if you said anything different." He said, "You know, you get your specialty, then you don't owe anything to anybody." And but he stayed friends with all of them.
Very good. Let me ask you about your other siblings who are affiliated with St. Peter's College. First, let's see, you mentioned your brother, Father Charles.
Yes.
Charles Dolan. Can you tell me something about his life and years at St. Peter's?
Oh, yes. As I say, he was, when he graduated from St. Peter's Prep in January of '32, and he was not quite 16 years old. He was born in 1916, and he had applied to enter the Jesuits, and they said no, he was too young. So he figured he would go on, and so he entered the college in January of '32, and then he was accepted in the Jesuits, I don't know whether it was July or August of '32. He then was sent sometime later for graduate studies in the Isle of Jersey, off the French coast from '36 to '39. And he came back through Europe just ahead of Hitler's marches on everybody. He had developed as quite a speaker, so with that background, he was invited all over to give speeches, even while he was teaching at Xavier High School in New York. He went on, he was ordained in, I think, 1947. 46 or 47, I think it's 47. And since then, he has been renowned as a preacher. He was on the Catholic Hour, Christians in Actions, all the radio things. He most recently has been on the Eternal Word TV, Mother Angelica's network, and both he and Father Jim. Father Jim was stationed in St. Louis for his philosophy in the early 40s. So he went in the Jesuits in 38 when he graduated from the prep. So he had 2 years novitiate. So then that would make it 1940. So I guess he must have been 4 years in St. Louis, because I remember while I was in the Navy, I visited him out there. So he was still there in 44. But Father Jim, through his contacts at St. Louis University, they found out that he was quite a singer. He was so good a singer that Horace Heights, Horace Heights Orchestra had a talent search and offered him a job, but he had already decided that he wanted to become a Jesuit. And but anyhow, he used to sing the introduction and the outgo, the Sacred Heart hymn, for the Sacred Heart radio program, which broadcast from St. Louis. So that, I guess, he started about 42 or 43. And then later on, both he and Father Charlie were very frequently during each year asked to give radio addresses. And he did that. Even he became an Army chaplain, Father Jim, in 1957. He was 57 to 77. He was an Army chaplain, but they even had him tape things and send them in while he was in Korea or Germany or any of the other stations that he had. But they both have a deservedly good reputation for preaching.
Very good. Okay, let me ask you about your other brother, John Dolan, who graduated in the class in 1943, you said.
That's right.
Can you tell me about his St. Peter's years and what he did after graduation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, John was a great track man here at the college, and the best bass in the Glee Club, good, deep second bass. And John and I were on the track team together. Of course, he was 2 years ahead of me, so it was principally during my first year and half of, in other words, the cross-country part of my second year, because then he graduated in March of 43, and the indoor track season was still going on. But he was running with the best of the national milers, and until they had him, everyone had to take a physical examination. And the doctor who examined him said no, he couldn't run, that he had a heart murmur. And here he was, as I say, just getting to his peak. Then when he was called for the Army, they found the same murmur. They got cardiologists to check him, and they did what they call a stethogram, which I don't know if it's used anymore, but it's sort of a tracing on a drum to show what the heart sounds were, and they found out that was the sound of his heart hitting the chest wall. It wasn't a murmur, and what he had was a perfect athlete's heart. He was built to be a middle distance runner, and so the Army took him with open arms, especially when they saw his, he was a genius IQ. You know, he was off the top of the scale. And so initially they were going to train him as a medic, but right after he got assigned to the medical training base down in Texas, they transferred him to a unit that was forming for Japanese cryptology. And that's what he ended up doing. And John, when he came out of the Army, had to read the Mortimer Adler's 100 best books. You know, you had to, and he used to get disturbed if he forgot anything. He had a great memory, so he took a memory training course, was so good at it that the man, Dr. Bruno First, who had organized and was one of the pioneers in memory training, hired him. He was getting married at that time in '51, and they shipped out to Colorado. He then taught the Air Force Academy, was started in the mid-'50s at Colorado Springs. I think it was an air base at that time. It was before they built the academy. And he taught the cadets, some of the original class of cadets, speed reading and memory training. He then went on to the West Coast and opened his own college of speed reading and memory training in San Francisco. And he lived there and continued his teaching. Most of his work was done with middle management in companies like the telephone company and the oil companies, training their people to meet and remember people they met at a cocktail party. As a demonstration, he would go into a room of 200 or 300 people, be introduced to each one of them, and then go around and address each one by name and tell each one of them something that they had told him about themselves. You know, extraordinary memory. John died about 4 years ago of a melanoma of the scalp that metastasized to brain, but it was a shame that such a beautiful brain got wasted. He had a magnificent mind.
Wow. And can you tell me about your last brother who went to St. Peter's, Frank Dolan?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Tell me
Yeah,
about
Frank
his
is retired now, and Frank, when he graduated from St. Peter's Prep in '44, I believe, went right in the Army and was shipped right after basic training, was shipped to Germany and was stationed near Dachau, and had to escort VIPs who were coming to visit Dachau, and this had a tremendous impression on him. When he came back from there, he felt man's inhumanity to man. He joined the Jesuits, but Frank was more of a free spirit. They got them on that long retreat, that 30-day retreat where you can't smoke, you can't talk, you can't do this. And one day he just had it, he just walked off, went down to the road and thumbed a ride and scared everybody because they didn't know what happened to him. But he then didn't do anything for a while, but then he went back and came to the college, got his degree. I'm not sure what he got it in, but he ultimately got his CPA. He has two sons, are CPAs, one of whom is the Joe, who was one of the ones that graduated from here, got his accounting degree here, then his CPA, and then his law degree. So he's doing very well. But Frank then was business for Bendix up in North Jersey, and then he, when they phased out, he became a headhunter. You know, executive search in the field, and even now he's retired, moved to a condo down in Toms River, but he's the ombudsman down there, and he's still gung-ho.
Very good. You want to take a break? You're doing great.
No,
so
we'll take
far.
a little sip of.
Yeah, please do. Wow, you're doing wonderfully. I'd like to ask more about your family. Wow, but
Yeah.
We'll come back to you in the early years. Okay, so where did you attend grammar and high school?
Yeah, I attended St. Patrick's Grammar School, which is on Bram Hall and Ocean Avenue here in the city. And I won a scholarship to Seton Hall Prep, which was the end of the world in those days. Going out to South Orange from Jersey City in 1937 was like going to the end of the world. As a matter of fact, we took a train. The train used to run through the Central Railroad cut and across the Hague to South Kearny, and then into Broad Street, Newark. That line is long dead. Then walked to Market Street, got a bus from there to the city line, and then you walked a mile and a half from the city line. There was no bus transportation in South Orange, but that was unique. As the seventh kid in the family, by the time I got to the 8th grade, I was up to here with being the kid brother. Your sister this, your brother that, that brother that. I said, you know, I want to get away from the family. And so it was, so I'm the only sibling or son who didn't go to St. Peter's Prep. And that has always been a point of distinction. Father Comey, who was the president of St. Peter's College when I was here, would introduce me to people as the only Dolan who didn't get a high school education.
Okay, so when did you first consider attending college after graduating from the prep?
Well, in our family, that was the push, even though it was the Depression, and I still, I was the executor of my father's estate when he died in '58. When I went over his books, I don't know how he and my mother got us through the Depression, because there really was no money. You know, it was shifting the books, but they were determined that education was the way you get ahead, and no matter how you did it, you had to get an education. We all worked our way through. Now, as I say, I had a scholarship for, and each of my brothers had scholarships before me, as my sisters did. So that kept the expenses down. And in addition, I got a NYA. I don't know if you ever heard of the NYA. It was another one of the anti-depression things, National Youth Administration. And it was a way of, I think we got something like 20 cents an hour. And I think I put in something like 20 hours a week. It was 30 cents an hour, because I used to get, I think, $6 a week. And that was enough to pay my car fare and lunch money. And I was assigned to work in the school library. And that made a book addict out of me. I ended up teaching myself speed reading, and I did most of the previewing of books for the library. I would skim them and then tell the librarian the ones that I thought were suitable for a high school, and then he would determine out of that list, because I was generous, which ones should be gotten. But it's a problem for me now because I became such a book addict. I've got a house full of books, and trying to get rid of them, because just my wife and myself now in a 10-room house, 4 of which are filled with books, is finding somebody to take the books and parting with so many that I love. But it was a good job, doing something I enjoyed. And when I, yeah, so that was Seton Hall. I mean, because I had to commute, I was not in any of the athletic teams. I was active in the other extracurricular activities, but not something that would tie you up late every night, because it was a good hour's commute each way.
So, what made you choose to attend St. Peter's as a student?
Say again.
I'm sorry. What what made you choose St. Peter's to attend school?
Oh, I think choosing St. Peter's College was preordained, because we had known St. Peter's, from when Father Charlie had gone downtown. It was down at the Exchange Place, the first class of 32. And then when they built the first buildings up here, I think it was about 1934 or so, they opened the first buildings. We took a tour. Back in those days, you used to buy a brick for a certain amount. It was $1 a brick or something like that. And so the family, relatives and so on, to support the Jesuits, bought bricks. So we got involved in a tour. As a matter of fact, even the family dog went on the tour. We used to say that Tippy, who was our family dog, went through college in 10 minutes. That he was the fastest graduate of St. Peter's College. So St. Peter's College was always a part of my life from the time I first realized. And the school, even though it was so young, by the time I was ready to go to college, already had an excellent reputation. At the time I finished high school, I was like a lot of kids, not decided what I wanted to do. My first love was newspaper work, and as a matter of fact, I worked that summer for the Jersey Journal, starting out as a copy boy. They were drafting the reporter, so I ended up as a cub reporter. Then I decided that that was not the way I wanted to spend my life. So when I enrolled here at the college, they asked you to list the 3 fields that you were most interested in. And at that time, I thought I would go into the Jesuits. But my second choice was medicine. My third was law. And so at that, the college already had an excellent reputation for all 3. Within the next few months, I met a very lovely girl and decided that the Jesuits were not for me. So it narrowed down to law or medicine. And increasingly, so when I enrolled it in the classics, because if I were going to go into the Jesuits, I was going to need the Latin and Greek. But for medicine, I would need the sciences. So I remember Fred Jacks as my freshman teacher of general chemistry, and I'm glad to see that Fred is still active. He's the real oral history of St. Peter's. But as time went on, it became quite obvious that I really wanted to be a doctor. And this was cemented further because I started here September of 41. When we began, we were the largest class in the college up to that time. There were 125 of us, and that was the largest class ever in the college. Then, of course, December 7th happened, and within the next few months, guys dropped out of the class to enlist, and we were all tempted to, I think, and we got lectures on how important it was for people who would be officer candidates to stay and get education, let the government decide when they needed you. Because back then, you didn't have to register to the for the draft until you were age 20. So I would not have been eligible until 1943. And then in the fall of 1942, meantime, my class had cut down to about 100. At that time, you only had the Army and Navy. In other words, the Marines, the Coast Guard, Public Health, and all were under the Navy. The Air Force was still part of the Army, was the Army Air Corps. So they brought recruiting teams. At that time, we had where Yanatelli Center is now, we had the Collins Gymnasium. And so they took large areas of the Collins Gym. The Army took one half and the Navy took the other half. And I always thought the Navy was a cleaner service. After serving in combat in Korea, I'm still convinced it's a lot cleaner service. So I decided I would go for the Navy, and I barely made the Navy had much tougher physical requirements, and both on teeth and eyes. I just barely made the grade. If I had not been a pre-medical, I would not have made it. If I were applying for training as a line officer, I would have been knocked out on my teeth and perhaps also my eyes. So I signed up then in October of 42 in what the Navy called its V-12 program. And that was their concept at that time, was that World War II was probably going to last at least 10 years because war on two fronts and the beating we had taken from Pearl Harbor on, that it was going to take us forever, especially to invade the Japanese home islands. And so the V-12 program was principally physicians, dentists, chaplains, and engineering officers. In other words, people who were going to have to go on for further graduate studies. Also enrolled, the same time were guys to go in as 90-day wonders, you know, to become commissioned as ensigns and so on. So that was October 42. I then was on inactive duty. We were called to duty on July 1st in 1943. And it's my understanding that when my group left the college, because at the same time that my Navy group left, a large group left with the Army, that there were only 43 students left in St. Peter's College. Fortunately, they had foreseen this, and they had arranged with the Army to base a cadet nurses program here. The training was given at Jersey City Medical Center, and the educational courses were given here, so that when people say there were no women in St. Peter's College till 1967, was it? They actually were here in 1943. 43 is right. So after basic training in the Navy, I was then sent to what was then Villanova College, which is now Villanova University, for pre-med training. And there, Reveille was at 5:30. There was a 10-mile run past all the girls' schools on the main line of Philadelphia, and then with lab courses, because it really was an accelerated program. Because I had just a year and a half. No, I had 2 years of St. Peter's when I left here. So I had this extra 9 months, finishing in March of 1944, but I ended up with 140 college credits, what the Navy had jammed into us in the accelerated program. There were no Saturdays or Sundays off, except unless it was a leave weekend, which was one weekend a month. But we went to school Saturday and Sunday, and you went from about 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 at night, and 3 hours of studying. And but I was never in better health. And Villanova would have given me a Bachelor of Science degree based on my credits from St. Peter's, plus what I had earned there, as I say, 140 college credits. But I wanted a St. Peter's College degree. I wanted my AB because I had worked on the classics. So I was stationed at a naval hospital doing just about anything you could think of that has to be done in a hospital: running elevators, running switchboards, taking the stiffs out of the morgue, you name it, I did it. And I found out that to get my St. Peter's degree, I needed 2 credits in history and 2 in philosophy. So through one of my brothers, I found out that Loyola University Chicago had a correspondence course. And I had a lot of fun. Some of the other fellows who were with me at the Naval Hospital were also interested, so we took our courses by correspondence, set up a very nice, lovely woman, Mrs. Sheehan, as I remember her name, was teaching me history by remote control, and she used to write lovely notes to this guy at the Naval Hospital. And so with that, we were able to work out those 4 credits we needed. So we qualified, and we graduated on June 6, 1944. There were, as I recall, there were 23 in my graduating class out of the original 125, 18 of us in Navy uniforms. And I then, as I say, I was still at the Naval Hospital. I then started medical school in October of '44 at NYU, College of Medicine. And again, we were still accelerated. Finished the first year, July 1st of '45, and then we were still accelerated when the war ended in August of '45. I was then released to inactive duty in December of '45. And when I was in my, I then went on the GI Bill, and in my senior year, early in 1948, the Navy wrote to us and asked us if we wanted to be commissioned as an ensign in the hospital corps until graduation, and then qualify for a Navy internship, be commissioned then as a lieutenant junior grade, and go on active duty with the medical corps. Well, at that time, the military hospitals had a very bad reputation for training. And the option was, you do this or we'll give you an honorable discharge. So we all wrote back and said, give us the discharge. Well, not all of us, most of us. And so I then started an internship at French Hospital in New York. It was supposed to be a 2-year internship, but midway through my first year, the Defense Department suddenly realized that they had discharged all of us we had promised when we went into this program that we would pay the military back 2 years for each year of training, which was a good deal in the middle of World War II, I'll tell you. But some genius in Washington discharged all of us, and we got these letters pleading with us to sign up, and I felt I had a moral obligation to serve. But I went down to the Navy. I was then going seriously with the girl who's now my wife, and so I went down to the Navy. I said, what kind of duty could I expect as a junior medical officer? They said, oh, junior medical officer, you could spend most of your time at sea. I said, thank you very much. I went down to the Army, and the Army said, doctor, we need doctors. Wherever you go, your wife will go with you. So I signed up with the Army, and the hospital released me from the second year of my internship because there was a lot of pressure was put on them to make young doctors available. So in August of 1949, my wife and I entered the Army together. We got on a train at Grand Central and crossed the country, a beautiful route, the California Zephyr through the Feather River Canyon, all the most beautiful places in the West. And I got to Letterman Hospital in San Francisco, and I reported into the adjutant's office on a Friday afternoon, and he said, oh yes, Lieutenant Dolan, what are we going to do with Lieutenant Dolan? And at this point, the colonel in charge of the outpatient department came in to sign off that he was going on leave. They said, oh yeah, we have nobody to run the outpatient department. Well, now, you know military hospitals, they not only take care of the sick of their area, they take care of all the retirees and so on. So this was a huge outpatient department. There must have been 50 civilian doctors, all, mature individuals. I was a snotty-nosed kid out of internship. How many nurses, but they needed an officer, a medical officer to run it. So meantime, I'm in civilian clothes. I said, well, what am I going to do about uniforms? I said, get those on your lunch hour. Well, it turned out they didn't have the uniforms I was going to need in Japan. I was being shipped to Tokyo. All in San Francisco at that time, they were in winter uniform year-round. It was wool OD even in July and August. So I had no trouble getting winter uniforms, but they couldn't, and I got some suntans, but I couldn't get a cap. And I was there about 2 weeks when I got my port call. We got our port call, and I was assigned, I was the only doctor on board a ship, the transport, Army transport, with 2,500 troops and about 1,000 dependents, bunch of small kids, and they had all gotten lousy colds with diarrhea in San Francisco. And, well, I could spend an hour telling you my adventures just on that trip, but I'll skip past that. But they were as good as their word that they would, because I was a first lieutenant, and at that time, only full colonels and above were allowed to bring their wives with them. So it was a lucky thing I was the ship's surgeon, because otherwise my wife really would have gotten the treatment from the other women. But it was quite an adventure. I then was stationed at the main quartermaster depot in Tokyo, which was the biggest quartermaster operation in the Pacific Command. And there, shortly after arriving there, I had 2,000 troops, but I used to have at least 100 on sick call every day. And it soon became apparent that we had a big problem with heroin addiction. Now, as I say, I trained at Bellevue, and we trained each year in psychiatry. During those 4 years, only one heroin addict had been available for them to teach us on. So that's how rare drug addiction was at the major hospital for New York City in the late 40s. But all of a sudden, I had a bunch of guys who were heroin addicts. I'm still convinced that we brought our drug problem back from Japan with us. I had conversations later, again, that would be another hour story to tell you about my experience with heroin addicts and dealing with the medical channels and so on. But I got fed up with it, and found out my wife was pregnant at this point, and I knew that there were 3 doctors taking care of her in the OBGYN department at Tokyo Army Hospital, and 2 of them were being released from service, going back to the state, leaving one guy to do the obstetrics. When I was a medical student, I had an interest in obstetrics because I had an older brother who was in the specialty. And so I went down to the medical personnel for 8th Army in Japan, and I talked to the personnel officer. I said, you're going to lose 2 of your 3 obstetricians in Tokyo. He says, yes, I know. I said, who do you have to replace them? He said, nobody. I said, why not me? He says, you don't have an OBGYN MOS. I said, you expect one guy to take care of all the obstetrics in Tokyo, 100 deliveries a month. You kill him. I said, why not assign me there? And I told him, my background. I said, at least I'm interested. And I had done more deliveries as a medical student than most people do in their first year of residency program. I said, give me a chance at it, see how I work. So again, they did. In January of 1950, they assigned me to work in obstetrics at Tokyo. And I was as happy as a bug in a rug, I'll tell you, because I enjoyed what I was doing. The 2 of us worked well together. We worked every other night and every other weekend, and you were tired, but it was, I enjoyed it, and everything was looking great. Our son was born there in May of 1950. He, by the way, is a graduate of the college, the 1972, and is a municipal prosecutor here in Jersey City now. And as I say, the world was golden. But then the end of June, the North Koreans invaded South Korea. I was mobilized then. I was supposed to be the admitting officer for the 1st MASH unit assigned to Korea, which was mobilized. It was about the 1st of July, 1st or 2nd of July. And they then pulled me off orders, and I felt lucky. They pulled me off orders because the other doctor doing obstetrics with me was being assigned to go down to Kyushu, Southern Island, to act as transport surgeon to transport the 25th Division up to Busan to go into Korea. So I said, boy, I really lucked out. A week later, they flew 2 lieutenant colonels over from the States to take our places, and I got sent in as a battalion surgeon with the 1st Cavalry Division, and went by LST, landed on the east coast of Korea, and found out we were behind enemy lines. Fortunately, the railroad from there dipped below and went into action then on the 18th of July as the 2nd Regiment into combat in Korea. And at that time, we were so terribly under strength. And, well, again, I could give you an hour lecture on the Korean War, a couple of hours, as a matter of fact. We were so short on everything. Truman and his defense minister, Lewis Johnson, had cut the military budget to hell. And all the best stuff was in Germany. Nothing was going to happen in Asia. So we didn't have any big tanks. The only tanks that we had for the first couple of weeks of the Korean War were 16-ton reconnaissance tanks. And you can put holes in them with a machine gun bullet. And so we sacrificed a lot of lives for that damn budget. And my big problem was getting my wounded out, because when we were so outmanned, it was obvious you could not hold the line because we were being constantly infiltrated. So much so that I had to send a gunner back on my litter jeeps. When I sent wounded back, somebody to fire back at the roadblocks that they set up at every turn in the road. And the roads there were terrible. They were mud, holes everywhere. And so you couldn't go much more than 10 miles an hour in a litter jeep. They'd go about 10 miles an hour or slower, depending if the guy had a fractured femur. In other words, even with morphine, they would scream with the pain when you hit a rut, so they would ease their way around the ruts, and then they would race like hell 15 or 20 miles an hour coming back. But one time it was so bad, I had to borrow the colonel who was my battalion commander, borrow his Jeep. He had a 50 millimeter machine gun mounted on it, and sent that out ahead to draw the fire, because it was so bad at this one point. In order to get any of my litter Jeeps back to the rear, we had to do it that way. And blocked that memory out. So that was the most difficult thing. And the worst thing was that as you're falling back, the guys who are on the front line are falling close to the enemy, and you don't realize they're there until you've fallen back a couple of 100 yards. So a lot of times we had to go back with a recon and force to get our wounded out. And so that was a roaring hell for the first 3 weeks. In other words, until about the 6th or so of August. And I remember the 6th of August because it was my wedding anniversary. My first 2 wedding anniversaries I spent away from my wife. So I remember that by that time we had pulled behind the Naktong. And at this point, we finally had a defense perimeter that you could work with. And so they could set up tripwires and various other things for perimeter defense. And well, as I say, I could go on. I have been we then led the attack north, and I was with the first troops across the 38th parallel into North Korea in the unit that took Pyongyang, their capital, and went north of there. The only paratrooper drop in the Korean War was made by the 187th Regimental Combat Team, latter part of October of '50, and I provided the ground medical support for that. That's one of the things we got a Presidential Unit Citation for. When I got, the war seemed to be over at the end of October of '50, so much so that Bob Hope brought his show up. Our battalion headquarters was in what must have been a military college, because it had what seemed like a built-in reviewing stand with steps going up both sides and a big parade ground out in front. And my aid station was room just inside to the right if you're coming in. And so I'd been there a couple of days, and this officer from 8th Army Special Services came up and said, "Can we have your room?" I said, "No, come on, look, it's the only decent place." I had been running an aid station out in the open for months. It's the first decent place we've had. He said, "Would you object if Bob Hope used it?" I said, "Not at all." So Bob Hope gave his show from this, and I got to meet that whole crew. And as I say, the world looked, we expected we were going to be back in Tokyo for Thanksgiving with a big parade and so on. The next day, our mail, we had taken an airport, so we had been without mail for about 10 days while we were on the road. They flew the mail in, come to learn that my son was in the hospital and they thought he had a basal skull fracture. I tried to get to a telephone. I was driving my Jeep. My Jeep driver was sick. I'm driving my Jeep. The roads were like this. I'm driving at a 45-degree angle while tanks are rolling up and 6-bys loaded with troops. Everybody's roaring up in our wake, and I'm going along the gutter. I got to the 8055 MASH, which was the unit that was I was supposed to have been assigned to initially, and a lot of my friends from Tokyo were there. And when I told them the story, this one guy who was my son's proxy godfather, said, he was the executive officer for the MASH. He said, "Look," he said, "you get permission from the CAV. We can put you on TDY. You'll be the medical officer on a medevac we have going to Tokyo. Go see how the kid is, and you can come back. They're usually in town about 12 hours. You can come back with them." Sounded great to me. So I have to go on the road and try to find division headquarters. And I finally located it. It consisted of one colonel, in other words, Saber Forward was called the division headquarters for 1st Cavalry, a colonel and a top sergeant. And when I told this colonel what had been proposed, he said, "Oh, no, 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 no. No way, TDY." And in retrospect, I could see why that would not have been smart. If that plane had gone in, how do you explain what Captain Dolan then was doing on that flight? He said, "But look," he says, "you got emergency leave. You got," I showed him the letter. He said, "You got compassionate leave." Even he couldn't provide me with a telephone to call Tokyo. The United Nations had control of the telephones. And so I could get, the sergeant pulls the mimeograph, typewriter and mimeograph off the truck, types up my orders, giving me 15 days emergency leave in Tokyo. By this time, it's night. I go creeping back to my building. Of course, it's all blacked out from the outside. I go into where my room is, expecting to have to turn on the flashlight, and they're all up packing. They said they had just gotten orders that they were going forward to support an ROK division that was advancing to the Yalu River. So I then packed up, got down, got a plane out that night about 1 o'clock in the morning. When I got back to Tokyo, my son was all right. It was not a basal skull fracture. He had a laceration. He had fallen, had a laceration in his ear canal that gave the bleeding they thought was basal skull fracture. He was out of the hospital. I had a nagging pain in the chest and a cough. I went down to the hospital to get an x-ray, and they stuck me right in the hospital. They thought I had a pulmonary embolus. And I was lying there in the hospital the second day. They delivered the Stars and Stripes, and the headline is 8th Cavalry Annihilated, my unit. Most of the guys from my battalion were either killed there or died in the prison camps. About a third survived. The doctor who took my place spent 3 years in the prison camp. And the kind of health condition I was in, I don't think I would have survived. So I then was shipped back again later, but subsequently was evacuated again, this time through a Navy hospital, which was a lovely way to go.
Very good, very good. Can I take a break real quick?
I'll
Wow.
just, if you want to, you need a break? No,
you're amazing. You okay? Very good.
Does he need a break?
Yeah, I need one.
Okay.
Just for,
He does?
Just
Yeah.
for a leg stretch.
Sure. Yeah, you got to stand up.
Wow, you're amazing. I hardly say 2 words.
What?
I hardly say 2 words every day, but
Yeah.
you're like, wow. You have a good memory and a good good grasp of the
Say again.
subject. You have a good memory, and
Oh,
good
yeah.
grasp of the subject. Very
Yeah, well, I still have it.
Yeah, 1 minute. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
take your time. That's no
Take
problem.
your time. Wow. Villanova, huh?
What?
Villanova.
Oh,
huh?
yes. Yeah.
That's where I go.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Graduate program, but
Yeah.
So
What are you graduate in?
history.
In history?
Right.
Uh-huh. Very good.
So how'd you like Philadelphia?
Oh, lovely. My girlfriend at that time was at Chestnut Hill.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I used to roll over through Norristown.
There you
Do
go.
they still have the P&W?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Philadelphia and Western, known as the Piss and Whistle.
That's about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the SEPTA line now.
Are you still going there, or?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Almost finished.
Yeah. How much further do you have to go?
Senior thesis, and then,
Uh-huh.
then I'm finished.
Just finish your thesis, and then you got it. Great.
That's it. Very
That's
good.
great. And oral history is your specialty, huh?
No.
What?
No, you. People like you are the specialists.
Yeah.
I'm just asking the questions.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an art to it, lining it up.
Yeah, I don't know if I've mastered it yet, but
Yeah.
we're working on it. Thanks
I-
to you.
Yeah, I have a son, got his doctorate from Harvard
Oh wow.
in American Studies. then taught there for a while.
Wonderful.
But apparently, I don't know whether most places have that, he could not get tenure if he just stayed on at Harvard.
Really?
That you have to farm out. So he now is at John Jay.
Right, in New York, yeah.
And but they had him I don't know how much you know about City University in New York,
Little bit.
you know the standards are low.
Yeah, compared to Harvard, yeah.
SAT, yeah, he was spoiled at Harvard, you know, teaching graduate students there.
Wow.
He learned the facts of life at
Oh, sure.
CUNY, and he would have classes of 90, and he's supposed to teach them to write. And, you know, how do you teach them to write except have them do essays?
Sure.
So he spends all his life, we rarely see him. He's always correcting papers. But he's apparently he's going to get tenure this year.
Oh, great.
And also they have approved him to teach in the graduate section, which I think is going to be at 42nd Street and 5th, I think. So he will be able to work with graduate students again, and
Wonderful, wonderful.
because he was really getting discouraged,
Oh,
you know, because it's just a rat race.
Sure.
And he's, I don't know whether you've seen in the papers, they got rid of the chancellor, woman W. Ann Reynolds.
That's right, yeah.
Apparently, he said now all they have to do, he said, is get rid of Pataki.
Oh, yeah. Either
But,
love him or hate him.
Yeah, and but he said, you know, Reynolds really has no concept of what it's like except pack as many students in as you can.
Oh,
And
see,
so
you don't learn that way. That's,
no, and it's impossible to teach a class of 90 the way he wants to teach people,
right.
without breaking your back. But he's very interested in oral history.
Good.
You know,
Wow.
as I understand, American studies is a combination of literature and history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. Harvard, that's...
Oh yeah.
That's
He
the-
had some
that's the top.
publications. Matter of fact, there was I think there's an encyclopedia on FDR.
Oh, okay.
So he did a couple of chapters on that. And
Let me, what's his name? Let's see if we can... What's his name?
what's that?
What's his name?
His name is Mark.
Mark.
M-A-R-C. All my children have names starting with M-A-R.
Okay.
Didn't plan it that way.
Mary, Margaret.
Yeah, Martin is
Martin, okay.
Yeah, he graduated from here in '72. He's Martin Charles. My father was
Okay.
Charles. He was named for my wife's father, who was dead when we married.
Okay.
So we gave him first preference. So then the Mary Ellen, who graduated from here in '73, is named for my mother and my wife's mother.
Right.
The next one is Margaret, was named for my wife. And so we were writing them down and said they're all MDs.
That's it.
And I got a lot of kidding because I said we were looking for a name to name the next child. So they were suggesting Marmaduke and Moisha and a lot of other things. So we settled on Mark Jerome. In other words, he has my name as his second name.
There you go.
So they
You just say MD. I mean, and somebody will come.
that's right. Yeah.
Mark. Do you need a refill or anything? Nope.
Oh, this is fine.
Good. Oh. Wow.
Anytime you want me to cut something short, just do this or
I just
something,
do it?
all right?
No,
Because
you're doing
I can
fine.
go on forever.
I know you gave me good. I was you took my last questions and you answered them then. So
Yeah.
now we'll just focus on St. Peter's. So we're great.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. That's the thing. You have so much to say, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard to you know. We should schedule you at 6 in the morning, and then we could have just went
Yes,
until
yeah.
like past midnight and do it all. So Very good. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's going good so far.
Yeah.
Three other people. We've done a lot from the 30s.
Uh-huh.
We're gonna do some from the 50s. We're gonna run the whole.
That's a great idea, yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a lot of people have been suggesting it, but finally we've got the funding for it. So
Yeah,
this is wonderful. So what are you doing nowadays in retirement?
Yeah.
Doing publications or any?
Well, no,
travel
I had my publications while I was active.
Okay.
You needed them to work up the ladder. In other words, I
Right.
was a clinical professor at 2 medical schools.
Oh wow.
First New Jersey Medical College, and then when I was at St. Vincent's, New York Medical College.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, I held title simultaneously at 3 schools. You're not supposed to be able to do that.
Wow.
But
That sounds tough.
I still had they weren't paying me, so nobody cared. New Jersey, the only one that insisted, even though I wasn't salaried, that I could not hold 2 titles was NYU.
Really?
Because I had been on the faculty at NYU Medical School from the time I returned in '51 and started training, we were teaching students, so we got associate titles.
Oh, okay.
No, I guess clinical assistant. So by the time when they started Seton Hall Medical School here at Jersey City Medical Center, I accepted a appointment as